In this 45th episode of our Road to Unicum, we review the Strv 103, the Tier 9 Swedish tank destroyer in World of Tanks, and has a number of really strong characteristics. The first is ninja levels of Camo, and after firing on the 62A, I backed up because I thought I would be spotted, but even when I lose my Camo net effect due to my movement, the 62A still doesn't spot me, and I'm able to punish him with another shell because the tank has a really fast reload to give it very high damage per minute. The silver ammo penetration is an exceptional 308, so you don't really need to dab the 2 key too much to fire premium ammo, since you'd only be gaining an additional 42 millimeters of penetration. And you can see here the tank has fantastic reverse speed. You can drive about 45 kilometers an hour in reverse, and that's how the tank was designed in real life, to be able to be driven in reverse. And this is great if you're trying to run away from people and still keep your gun pointed at them so you can fire at them, and even more importantly, to gain the benefit of the armor. And that's really the defining characteristic to the Strv relative to the Swedish tank destroyers that come before it, is this one has meaningful armor. And with the way the normalization and ricochet mechanics work, you can very consistently bounce shells of 120 millimeters or less, as long as the shooter doesn't hit your cupola. Now, I did eat a shell from this VK heavy tank because he's got a 15 centimeter gun, so guns that are that high typically will overmatch your armor and go right through, unless they're hitting at a very particularly sharp angle. But what's amazing about this is, I can brawl or be in a very aggressive forward position fighting heavy tanks, because in some cases they're going to have a hard time penetrating me, just like that Conqueror did. Now, this tank does have paper thin side armor, so anything will penetrate it, and you've got to be really careful about getting tracked, because the tank has to be able to move in order to aim its gun. There is also a bit of a learning curve in terms of switching in and out of the siege and travel modes, because it takes that second and a half or so to switch modes, and during that time when you're switching modes, you are self-rooted, you're immobilized in place, and so tanks might have the ability to flank you or track you, which can be really dangerous. In siege mode, this tank has not only really good damage per minute, but it also has very good gun depression. And so with the way the tank is angled so steeply, and with the gun sitting fairly high on the platform, what this allows you to do is just expose only a sliver of the top of your tank, which you can see. I'm going to back up here because I know there's a Untitled TD out there, and I don't want to give him too much to hit, and you can see I bounced a shell from him. Now, what's fun about this tank, the tanks that precede it within the line are all pretty much red line snipers. You got to maintain your distance because they're non-turreted, and they have either a combination of weak armor and derpy gun handling or low DPM. Whereas with the Strv 103, it has excellent DPM and it has really good armor. So what I can do is play the ridges up here, and there's a couple reasons why I'm doing this. One, I can bully these enemy tanks, and two, if I attract fire, for the most part, if they're firing AP shells at me, they're most likely going to bounce unless they're able to catch me in my sides or hit my cupola. But I'm not going to stand still and make it easy for them to hit that little weak spot. Right, so after firing, I'm constantly wiggling, pointing my hull in the direction of oncoming fire, and these tanks that are in front of me, they're going to have a hard time penetrating, with what I'm doing here. We're already down 3 tanks, but if I can just manage to get enough damage into these tanks, we should be able to claw this back. Kind of have to have your head on a swivel a little bit, when you're brawling like this, and then you definitely need to be careful of enemy arty, because this tank's armor is paper thin, and because the siege mode mechanic is such a limiting factor in terms of mobility. You are a prime candidate for arty, but that's another reason why I can come up here and play the ridge line. There's no arty in this match. Notice whenever possible, I'm working damage in that Skoda. It's really important to do that against autoloaders. They're really dangerous late game if they still have a good chunk of their hit points, because they can clip people out. But if you beat them up early, it really limits their tactical flexibility down the road. And then this Super Pershing is making a couple mistakes. One, he's trying to cross late. You either cross early and get to the hill so you can hull down, or if you're going to cross the hills late, you can't do it across open ground like this, especially when I've shot him 2 times and he still continued to drive into my field of fire. That Emil 2 did tag me through my paper-thin side armor, but it's okay. I turned my hull to discourage him from looking at me. He certainly doesn't want to face my gun, and that gives me enough time to finish off the Ferdinand so that we're pretty much cleared out the northwestern flank. It's just this Emil 2 here, and he's about to get served. He caught me again, but overall I've been able to bounce a fair amount of damage and extend my time to live and then get the finishing shot on him. And then this ISG-152 is looking in this direction. That's a very high caliber gun. He can one-shot me for my remaining health. And you can see like that T-34 wasn't respecting the 152's position. One really nice thing about the gun handling for this tank is that between the good gun handling, very good accuracy, and then high rate of fire, you can snapshot a lot, and you don't have to wait for like a 15 or 20 second reload. So I actually run this tank without any aim improving equipment, and then there's some quality driving on my part. It definitely does take some time to get used to swapping modes. It sounds like a really simple thing, but if you get stuck in siege mode and you've been spotted and there are tanks that are to the side of you, you can get absolutely wrecked. And that really is the key. If you're trying to counter a Strv, track him. You can't aim his gun. Punch him through the front drive wheel so you can hit him through that paper thin side armor. And here, for example, this is like the typical thing. You'll switch into siege mode to try to fire at something, and then it'll die, so you have to switch back to travel mode, and all this ends up burning up time. But that being said, the tank is very mobile. It has a good platform for a tank destroyer, and so there's some tank destroyers that just lack the mobility to be able to meaningfully flex, but this one has mobility in spades. The Strv 103B, the tank that is 1 tier up, has an almost identical playstyle to the tier 9. I think it's got obviously better DPM as you would expect, and I think marginally better armor. But the play style is pretty much the same. You're just 1 tier up in terms of what you're going to be facing. So deal about 200 damage here, get 5 kills. More importantly, drew a lot of fire and bounced a lot of potential damage, which is protecting my teammates. This is one of the few tank destroyers that can meaningfully tank damage, and I mean that like in an MMO turn, just like you can do that with the E3 or the JPE 100. You can really bully people. Now, if you are facing another Strv tank destroyer, if you're at a short to intermediate range, you want to aim for that cupola, take your time aiming in, and then wiggle like I am in between shots. So I'm out landing this Strv, and it looked like he had loaded up high explosive, which he dirt shotted, and that's something you can do against this tank, is just whittle. If you're at a great distance against a Strv 103, is load HE and just whittle them down. Of course, if you've got other targets that are available, I'd just rather do that than flank the Strv last. But it's a super hard tank to face if you're trying to push a corridor, especially in an area where there's a lot of soft cover and you can't see it. So these tanks can be a real pain in the ass to fight, especially on vision maps, or in situations where you're trying to advance on the enemy and you've got a Strv sitting in the back, holding that corridor. I did find this tank to be way more satisfying to play. The UDES, the tier 8, I absolutely despised, partly because I was new to the siege mechanic, but that tank really can't function as anything but a redline sniper because it has no armor, and unlike the Strv, it won't bounce anything. And then here's this Strv 103B trying his darndest to get some damage into me, but I land yet another shot through his cupola and put him down. So let's take a look at some questions from prior videos. Captain Vinyl Siding asks, why do you play with the 90mm on the T49? And he's asking, instead of the 152 derp gun. And part of it has to do with the shift in mechanics. With patch 9.18, the T49 was moved up to tier 9, and the 90mm silver penetration was buffed to 212. And so now you can very reliably pen a lot of tanks on their sides with 212 silver penetration, and the gun handling and what I would say its functional DPM of the T49 is much higher. You don't have to risk exposure as much. If you're trying to aim in with the 90mm, you can snapshot to your heart's content. So I found for pubbing that the 90mm is much more consistent. Zevin has said that he does that for pubbing, but for pre-made contexts he prefers the 152 for the shock value and coordinated bursts, and that makes sense. Similar question about light tanks. Why do I use the 5cm single shot gun instead of the 3cm autoloader on the Leopard? And to understand that, you really need to start with the Lukes. So the Tier 4 Lukes has the autocannon, where that's the best penetrating gun it has available, and you can single clip out Tier 4 and 5 tanks. But the Leopard is a tier higher, and so it faces Tier 6s and 7s, where you would typically need at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 clips to kill an opponent, and between the long reload and the Leopard being a squishy target, that's just not viable. So if you go with the 5cm single shot gun, you not only get better silver penetration, you get far better accuracy and gun handling, and about 50% more DPM. So I found to be more consistent for pubbing, even if it's less fun than being able to clip people out. I want to give out a big thanks to O3DG and also to Blindsider for their PayPal donations and their financial support. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your questions, and hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.